On this Friday night, a preliminary ruling in the genocide case against Israel. The orders from the UN's top court.
And Israel cannot be accepted from complying.
The decision's significance, where it falls short, and how Canada is reacting. Breaking news, the verdict is in. A jury decides the fate of Donald Trump at his defamation trial. The escalating battle at the border between Texas and Mexico.
Governor Abbott is getting in the way.
The U.S. Supreme Court's decision and the state's defiance. Wrestling titan Vince McMahon hit with a federal lawsuit. A former employee's graphic and grisly claims against the WWE founder. And putting their best foot forward in Canada.
For us, it's a very big opportunity.
Ukraine's national ballet dances for democracy.
Global National with Farah Nasser. Reporting tonight, Neetu Garcha.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. The International Court of Justice has delivered a much-anticipated ruling demanding Israel do more to contain the death and damage its military operation has brought to Gaza.
Israel must, in accordance with its obligations under the Genocide Convention, in relation to Palestinians in Gaza, take all measures within its power to prevent the commission of all acts within the scope of Article 2 of the Convention.
South Africa brought forth the lawsuit alleging the war in Gaza amounts to genocide against Palestinians. Israel has vehemently rejected the accusation, calling the case outrageous. Its national security minister responding bluntly to today's ruling on social media, saying the Hague schmag. The reaction to the court's decision is widespread, including here in Canada, where members of the Liberal government remain divided. More on that in a moment. We start in The Hague with a ruling that may lack immediate practical consequences in Gaza, but could ultimately hold deep historical resonance for people on all sides of this conflict. Crystal Goomansingh begins our coverage.
All measures.
The panel of international judges was sitting in The Hague when celebrations began in South Africa. The court shared two decisions. It stated the case alleging Israel violated the Genocide Convention in Gaza would proceed. And the court ordered Israel to take a number of immediate and effective measures. They include getting urgently needed basic services and humanitarian assistance to Palestinians. The court said Israel needs to prevent and punish the direct and public incitement to commit genocide in the Gaza Strip and prevent the destruction and ensure the preservation of evidence related to the larger case by South Africa.
Israel has very powerful friends who I hope will advise Israel that they should act.
The International Court of Justice orders are legally binding, but there's no means of enforcement. This is what Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu had to say.
Israel's commitment to international law is unwavering. Equally unwavering is our sacred commitment to continue to defend our country and defend our people.
The fact that Israel was not ordered to halt its military operations in Gaza could have been a strategic move by the court, says this former Canadian foreign minister.
It's a question of how do you do it? And you can't do it with a wide open, shoot 'em up kind of arrangement. You're going to have to really live by the rules and the laws of the Geneva Convention.
Bring them home! Netanyahu called the charge of genocide false and outrageous. He and supporters outside the court pointed to the horrific crimes committed by Hamas and the hostages still being held, issues the court addressed.
It is gravely concerned about the fate of the hostages abducted during the attack in Israel on 7 October 2023.
The court taking action after multiple votes at the UN Security Council going nowhere is considered by some a means of reestablishing faith and trust in international rules of law. There was, however, something missing for this human rights lawyer.
One of the measures that wasn't implemented was to allow a fact-finding mission to report back. I think that is a failure by the court.
More provisional measures could still be added. Israel was instructed to report back in 1 month's time, showing how it has addressed the court's orders. Neetu?
Crystal Goomansingh in London. Thanks, Crystal. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau previously said Canada is watching the case carefully and stands behind the international court. But despite today's ruling, the federal government still isn't offering a clear stance toward the allegations against Israel. As Mackenzie Gray reports, that hasn't stopped divisions around the issue from arising within the Liberal caucus itself.
Any comment on the ICJ ruling? What will Canada do?
It's something the Prime Minister really didn't want to talk about. Justin Trudeau dodging questions 4 separate times on what Canada's position is on the International Court of Justice ruling.
No comment, though?
It wasn't until late this afternoon the Foreign Affairs Minister commented, recycling her old lines on the case. Our support for the ICJ does not mean that we accept the premise of the case brought by South Africa, Melanie Joly said in a statement. It is for the ICJ to make a final decision on the case, which it has not done today. We continue to follow the case very closely. Liberal MPs have followed the case, showing a caucus divided.
The court did not take a position on whether or not Israel is committing genocide. My position has been that Israel is not committing genocide, that it's baseless and it's insulting.
I'm a bit disappointed that they didn't ask for an immediate ceasefire, but what they have said in making sure that humanitarian aid gets through Gaza, civilians are protected, and I hope Israel will abide by that.
Representatives from both Israel and the Palestinians found common ground on wanting to know what the Canadian government thinks of the ruling.
We call on Canada to be the leader and champion of the international rules-based order.
Our position is that we call on the international community to, on the face of it already, to reject this claim because it's completely false.
The government taking its time is nothing new. It took nearly a week with multiple clarifications to state Canada's position on the case being brought forward, in large part because of the electoral ramifications. 9 of the top 10 ridings with the highest Jewish populations are Liberal seats, and the 10 largest Muslim populations are all represented by Liberals.
It continues to be a profoundly divisive issue among Canadians, but especially among the ranks and of the current Liberal base.
The Conservatives have said it's Hamas committing a genocide, but had no comment on today's ruling. But the NDP did, calling on the government to tell Israel to comply with the court's decision.
People are losing their lives, and Canada has an obligation. And I feel very much like the government is trying to sort of sit on the fence.
The Liberals' tightrope position on the conflict will be put to the political test later this year when a by-election takes place in Toronto-St. Paul's, Neithu, one of those Liberal ridings with a large Jewish population.
Mackenzie Gray in Ottawa. Thanks, Mackenzie. Canada and the U.S. are temporarily pausing funding for the UN Relief Agency for Palestinian refugees after allegations some of its staff took part in Hamas's October 7th attack. The humanitarian agency fired several staff members after Israeli authorities provided information of their suspected involvement. The UN agency is doing its own investigation. The U.S. State Department says the claims pertain to at least 12 people. The International Development Minister says there will be no additional funding from Canada while the agency undertakes a thorough investigation into these allegations. Former U.S. President Donald Trump has been splitting his time between courtrooms and the campaign trail. Late this afternoon, a jury in New York reached a verdict in his defamation trial. At issue, whether Trump damaged magazine columnist E. Jean Carroll's reputation by denying he raped her and how much in damages he should pay. Let's bring in our Jackson Prosco now. Jackson, the jury said the former president must pay much more than the $24 million Carroll's lawyers had been calling for.
A whole lot more, Neithu. The Manhattan jury ordered Trump to pay $83 million to E. Jean Carroll for defaming her ever since she made her original rape accusation back in 2019. The settlement includes $11 million to fund a reputational repair campaign and another $7.3 million for emotional harm that she suffered. During the course of the trial, Carroll testified that she was frightened by persistent attacks from Trump and his supporters and that her reputation was shattered. Now, this is the second award she has received after a different jury found Trump liable for sexually abusing her back in the mid-90s in a department store dressing room. Trump says he's going to appeal. He calls this a Biden-directed witch hunt, which is not at all true. Remember, this was a civil suit brought by a private individual, and the damages were awarded by a jury of ordinary citizens. But given the ferociousness of Trump's attacks, the judge offered this advice to jurors: never disclose that you were on this jury. Neithu?
And as this has been going on, Trump has also been fueling tensions over illegal migration along the U.S.-Mexico border. Jackson, we know that in December alone, roughly 250,000 migrants crossed the southern border into the U.S. But where do things stand today?
Well, with Trump's encouragement, Republican governors in half of the country are now backing Texas in this legal standoff with the federal government, and it's intensifying concerns about a potential constitutional crisis in the making. The razor wire on the southern border is a sharp message of defiance from Texas, where the governor ordered the state's National Guard to block migrants from crossing the Rio Grande, claiming Texas faces an invasion.
What Texas is asserting is our Article 1, Section 10 right of self-defense.
The Supreme Court disagrees. This week, it ordered Texas to allow federal Border Patrol agents to remove the wire.
What we want is Border Patrol to be able to do their jobs. And right now, Governor Abbott is getting in the way.
Texas won't back down and is refusing to acknowledge the court ruling or federal authority over the border.
The appearance of asylum seekers, and even large amounts of asylum seekers at the border, is not the type of invasion that the Constitution talks about.
Make no mistake, this is entirely about election year politics. Republicans under Donald Trump want to make migration the central issue in the presidential campaign. 25 Republican-led states are now backing Texas. Some have sent their own National Guard troops to the border. In doing so, they've brought the U.S. to the brink of a constitutional crisis.
This is the exact thing that the United States went through in its first 70 to 80 years of existence, leading to eventually the secession of states and the Civil War.
Back in Washington, a bipartisan group of lawmakers is working on a border bill to deal with the record surge in migrants. But hopes of passing the legislation have fallen apart as Trump signals he wants to campaign on border chaos.
The idea that someone running for president would say, please hurt the country so I can blame my opponent and help my politics is a shocking development.
And you know, the delay on passing a border bill isn't just adding to the tension in Texas. Aid for Ukraine and Israel are tied up here, too. So Republicans who worked on that bill are now worried that if they're trying to keep Trump happy but fail to pass the bill, they'll actually end up wearing blame for the crisis at the border by the time the election rolls around in November. Nitu?
Jackson Prosco in Washington. Thanks, Jackson. An Ontario man accused of sending lethal substances to people at risk of self-harm is facing upgraded first-degree murder charges. Kenneth Law's lawyer says he will plead not guilty to all 14 upgraded murder charges. Law is also facing 14 counts of counseling or aiding suicide within Ontario. Police allege he operated several websites selling sodium nitrite, a substance that can be toxic in large doses. Investigators suspect he sent more than 1,200 packages of supplies to 40 countries, including 160 in Canada alone. If you or someone you know needs help, you can call or text 988, Canada's new suicide crisis helpline. The service is available in both English and French, 24 hours a day, every day. A Quebec Superior Court judge has refused to grant an injunction that would have halted tree cutting east of Montreal at the site of a future electric vehicle facility. It's a decision Canada's industry minister welcomes for the future of the country's EV industry.
And for me, this is a flagship project that shows to Quebecers, to our young people, that, you know what, you can care about the environment and at the same time do well from an economic perspective. And so I hope people will see it in the broader context.
The judge ruled Swedish company Northvolt had all the necessary permits to continue its preparatory work. Last week, the company voluntarily paused work when an environmental group and 3 citizens filed an injunction. The project was announced in the fall, touting production of some of the greenest batteries in the world. Environmental groups are concerned about the impact on the area's biodiversity. Disturbing accusations against the founder of the WWE. Coming up, the explicit claims leveled at Vince McMahon. In the world of pro wrestling, Vince McMahon was the kingpin and a big part of the show. Now the World Wrestling Entertainment founder is being accused by a former employee of sex abuse, trafficking, and exploitation. Eric Sorensen looks at the fallout from the lawsuit, what it could mean for McMahon's future, and the wrestling empire he started.
Don't tell me you don't care who I am. I'm Vince McMahon.
In public, it was all a show. Big ego, ill-tempered, at times abusive. Off camera, according to a lawsuit, Vince McMahon was all of that and much, much worse. Janelle Grant says McMahon hired her at WWE World Wrestling Entertainment, where she says she was sexually and emotionally abused and trafficked to other employees. The suit shows alleged texts from McMahon with obscene descriptions of sex acts with Grant. Grant names McMahon and another executive, John Laurinaitis, alleging she felt trapped, submitting to McMahon's sexual demands or facing ruin, alleging others at the WWE knew what was going on and actively sought to conceal the wrongdoing. A spokesperson for McMahon gave a statement to online news outlet Wrestling Inc. This lawsuit is replete with lies, obscene, made-up instances that never occurred. He will vigorously defend himself. Though WWE's parent company, TKO Group, says, we take Ms. Grant's horrific allegations very seriously and are addressing this matter internally. John Pollock has a wrestling podcast.
I don't think anyone could have been adequately prepared for just how dark of a series of allegations as these were.
Over the last 40 years, McMahon has transformed what critics call an imitation sport, pro wrestling, into a macho, sexualized, over-the-top, billion-dollar entertainment empire.
The Justice Department has charged Vincent McMahon of Connecticut.
McMahon has been in trouble before, accused of distributing steroids to wrestlers in the 1990s. 2 years ago, the WWE board looked into claims of sexual misconduct and secret payments made to Grant and other women by McMahon.
He has had a certain Teflon quality about him to get through certain controversies, but I think many are wrestling with that portion of Vince McMahon that has become so public and impossible to avoid.
Tonight, there are calls for the larger-than-life face of pro wrestling to step away from the world he created and the organization he built. Eric Sorensen, Global News, Toronto.
A high-ranking member of the Roman Catholic Church in Quebec is facing allegations of sexual assault. Court documents filed yesterday as part of an ongoing class action lawsuit authorized in 2022 against the Archdiocese of Quebec City allege Cardinal Gérald Lacroix, the current Archbishop of Quebec City, touched a 17-year-old girl without consent. The allegations date back to 1987 and 1988. Ahead, a major update on the health of King Charles.
Vorrei sottolineare brevemente due cose.
Pope Francis again tried to clarify the Vatican's landmark ruling that allowed priests to administer blessings to same-sex couples. In an address to Vatican members, the pontiff says the blessings are not meant to justify the unions. Instead, they are meant for the people involved to get closer to God. The December ruling sparked widespread debate and pushback throughout the Catholic Church, which still considers gay sex as sinful. King Charles is recovering after undergoing a scheduled corrective procedure for his enlarged prostate. The 75-year-old monarch is expected to spend at least one night in hospital. Charles is at the same facility as Kate, the Princess of Wales. She had abdominal surgery last week. Queen Camilla appeared in good spirits as she left the hospital, saying the king is doing well. Last week, Buckingham Palace revealed the king's condition is benign. Dancing for Democracy. Next, Ukraine's National Ballet tours Canada, raising awareness for those back home. The National Ballet of Ukraine is touring Canada, its first tour in North America since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine almost 2 years ago. The constant threat of attack almost permanently closed the curtain on the ballet company. But as Heather Yurex-West explains, the dancers have found a way to keep the performance going.
Sharing the stage with images of war, Ukraine's National Ballet has an important story to tell.
For us, it's a very big opportunity for all company and for all dancers.
That opportunity to share with audiences across Canada that after almost 2 years of war, Ukraine's National Ballet is still going strong, though it hasn't been an easy road.
A lot of people left our country, and a lot of artists left our country.
In the early days of Russia's full-scale invasion, the company saw its numbers fall from 150 artists to less than 30. But as the months went by, the ballet found a way to dance on, even when air raid sirens in Kyiv would force performances to pause, sending dancers and their audience underground.
We see consistently throughout the conflict in Ukraine that the destruction of culture has actually been a really key feature. So we've seen museums looted, we have seen concert halls, just like the one we're in right now, completely destroyed.
It's why this tour, titled Nadia or Hope Ukraine, means so much to so many, not just to the dancers themselves, but to those displaced Ukrainians currently calling Canada home.
We actually had the great privilege of inviting about 500 refugees to the show in Montreal. We invited them free of charge just so they could get a little bit of taste of home.
The tour is also about raising awareness and funds. In the middle of winter and ravaged by years of war, Ukraine is in the midst of a humanitarian crisis. Audiences in 10 Canadian cities will enjoy their performances as Ukraine's National Ballet dances for their people, whether displaced around the world or living through war back at home. Heather Urex-West, Global News, Calgary.
And that is Global National for this Friday night. I'm Neetu Garcha. Tonight's Your Canada is this bird's eye view of a frozen trout lake in North Bay, Ontario. We love seeing your Canada. Please email your photos to viewers@globalnational.com. Thanks so much for watching and hope you'll join us again tomorrow. Have a great night.